and a very warm welcome to everybody. Even though I can't see you, it's lovely to have you with us. I'm going to begin with a prayer which actually comes from the Orthodox liturgy, but I think expresses very well what most of us might want to say just at the moment. Almighty Lord God, your glory cannot be approached. Your compassion knows no bounds, and your love for all mankind is beyond human expression. In your mercy, look on us and all your people. Do not leave us to our sins, but deal with us according to your goodness. Guide us to the haven of your will, and make us truly obedient to your commandments. For you, O God, are good and ever-loving, and we glorify you, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, now and forever, to the ages of ages. Amen. Now, just setting the scene for everything that's to come, I'd like to start with a brief reading from the second letter of Paul to the Corinthians, a very well-known one, often used for stewardship talks and so on. We want you to know, brothers and sisters, about the grace of God that's been granted to the churches of Macedonia. For during a severe ordeal of affliction, their abundant joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part. For as I can testify, they voluntarily gave according to their means, and even beyond their means, begging us earnestly for the privilege of sharing in this ministry to the saints. And this not merely as we expected, they gave themselves first to the Lord, and by the will of God to us, so that we might urge Titus that as he'd already made a beginning, so he should also complete this generous undertaking among you. Now, as you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in utmost eagerness, and in our love for you, so we want you to excel also in this generous undertaking. I don't say this as a command, but I'm testing the genuineness of your love against the earnestness of others. For you know the generous act of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, so that by his poverty you might become rich. You may know the story about a woman who grudgingly dropped a coin into the collection plate on her way into church. There's days when we were able to go to church still, as we will be again soon, I hope. And as the service got going, her mouth turned down at the corners. She looked around her disapprovingly at the building, at the rest of the congregation, especially two rather active toddlers, and at the flower arrangements. The sermon was the last straw, and after it, she audibly complained to her neighbour about the low standard of preaching in this church. Well, Mum, piped up her 7-year-old son, who was sitting in subdued silence beside her, what can you expect for 10p? Well, I suppose, had she known that the sermon was going to be on giving, she might not have put anything in the plate at all. She certainly wouldn't have been alone in regarding money as an unsuitable, unspiritual subject for a preacher to tackle. But as we all know, that wasn't the way Jesus saw it. In the Gospels, he has more to say about money than about heaven. And Paul and the other New Testament writers talk about it a lot. They regarded financial giving as intimately and directly connected with spiritual development, just as we heard in that reading from 2 Corinthians. And I want to say two things briefly about that passage, which seem to me to be particularly relevant to our current situation as a way of setting the scene for this webinar. The first is that all our stewardship, our giving, the whole question of parish offer is reactive. It begins not with what we give to God, but with what he gives to us, his son, Jesus, who died on the cross out of love for you and for me. Paul says that in verse 9 of 2 Corinthians 8, for you know, he says, the generous act of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, so that by his poverty you might become rich. So it isn't only that Christ sets us an example of generosity and sacrifice. According to Paul, it's actually through what Christ has done that we're able to respond to his giving to us with our own to him. And that's why we're told in that chapter that the Macedonians, to whom Paul is appealing there, gave themselves first to the Lord. Their giving began as an act of Christian commitment. And just the same is true today. I think people, as we all know, only give sacrificially and gladly when they've experienced the love of the Lord for them and really love him in return. People in love want to give, as florists and chocolatiers on Valentine's Day know very well. It's as simple as that. So our giving is a test of our discipleship. Our generosity, or lack of it, shows the extent to which we really know God's generosity to us. If there's no sacrificial giving to back it up, everything we say about our Christian faith is mere words. The second thing about stewardship that and parish offer that comes out of that passage is that it is corporate. As well as being reactive, it's corporate. Paul wasn't addressing the Corinthians as isolated individuals. He was appealing to them as a church. He was wanting them to budget as a family faced with a particular need. And the same applies to us. As members of God's family here in Cumbria, we are brothers and sisters. We're not single children. But for some reason, we, and this is true of Christians absolutely everywhere, tend to get rather touchy and sensitive about our finances, whether it's our individual finances or our church finances. And perhaps that's because some of us feel a little uncertain or insecure or even guilty because we haven't really thought them through or prayed them through. I heard a wise comment the other day. The church hasn't got a financial problem. It's got a spiritual problem. I remember in Parish, where I was vicar some years ago, having a discussion with one of my congregation who was a door-to-door salesman. We were having a stewardship campaign, and he said, well, you need the same philosophy as me, which is, you know that the money in your customers' pockets belongs to you. The question is, how are you going to release it? The money in our pockets really does belong to God. It just needs to be released for his work. And the problem for many congregations is that we can be like huge blocks of ice. Bits are chipped off, sometimes quite big bits, by appeals and stewardship programs and fundraising efforts and so on. But it's a laborious and it's often quite a painful process. The answer, of course, is that the ice needs to be exposed to heat, to the heat of the sun, to the warmth of God's love, to the heat, the fire of his Holy Spirit. And then the ice begins to melt and really to overflow. Well, Paul also wanted the Corinthians to be aware of a very particular situation affecting their brothers and sisters and affecting them as well. And we fully understand the very difficult financial situation that many of the parishes in this diocese find themselves in as a result of the coronavirus. We've had quite a lot of feedback from many of you, for which thank you. And you're telling us that during this lockdown period, you've lost anything between 50 and 100% of your parish income due to loss of giving on the plate because of no services, lack of envelope giving, fundraisers being cancelled, room hire ceasing, occasional offices not happening, and so on and so on. And that makes Parish Offer particularly difficult this year, and the outlook for planning the resourcing of the church moving forward a real challenge for you and for the diocese as a whole. And the bottom line today is that we want to work with you on this together. to meet the challenges and find some solutions. Now, I know that many of you on this webinar are treasurers. We're so grateful for the fact that, generally speaking, the relationships between us all are excellent. And we know that relationships in a diocese, rather like in a marriage, are there for the good times and the bad times, for better and for worse. And we certainly find ourselves in very challenging financial times right now, just like many businesses and many individuals. So we want to continue working together as we navigate our way through this crisis, and find our way to sustain mission and ministry through and beyond it. And that's why we wanted to hold this webinar. It's about continuing that relationship, both with treasurers and also with all the clergy and PCC members who are so diligently serving God in and through the local church. Today, we're taking this opportunity to be as honest as we can with you, and it's an opportunity for you to have a forum to be absolutely honest with those of us who are on this panel. And so we do hope that you'll be able to take on board some of the information that we're sharing about the financial and strategic decisions that we're facing as a diocese and as an ecumenical county in the months ahead. But also, we want this to be a time when we can listen very carefully to what you want to say to us at a parish level. So please share your questions, your comments, your experience at the moment, your concerns, using the chat and question and answer functions throughout this webinar. As Dave said in his introduction right at the beginning, there will be two opportunities to have questions and answers and discussion around the topics raised. And so most grateful to everyone for taking part in this, and very grateful to the members of our panel, who hopefully you'll be able to see. And I'm going to hand over now to Rick Jaques, our finance officer, who is going to explain a little bit about the financial situation in the diocese at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much, Bishop James. Welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us, whether you're joining us live as we speak now or catching up later on the YouTube channel. It's great to have such a good response and offer to come and hear and share together what we wanted to talk about this afternoon. Derek Hurton, our Diocesan Secretary, was to have joined us. Unfortunately, at the last minute, he's had to join in a hospital appointment this afternoon, so he may join us for questions later if he's able to. Hopefully, we'll cover the topics that he would have discussed. I think one of the key words, I've probably said it more in the last 3 months than I've ever said in my life, is massive uncertainty, and I think that reflects so much of what is going on in our lives, in our homes, our jobs, in our finances, in our churches, and particularly around finances, whether they be our home finances, global economic finances, or your church finances. And that's so much why we wanted to come together this afternoon. In your PCs and for us as a diocese, income has been and will continue to be really impacted by this, and it's causing us significant issues and a few sleepless nights, I imagine, all around the county and the country. We've got a fair idea of what's happened so far. We can guess what might happen in the future, but there are so many things that are unknown to us still, and that makes it really difficult to plan. But plan is something that we have to do. It's easy to be fearful, it's easy to lose hope, and we hope that the message that we give you today is one that, although times are challenging, we will get through this, we will find ways through it, and by working together we can come out of this well and with strength and with hope. We need to trust, this is Bishop James's territory, isn't it? We really need to trust God that he will provide for us, that he will give us a way forward, he will show us the paths that we need to take. My church has been doing a lot around the Psalms over the last month, and there's so much encouragement there that God will guide us through, and that he is our our rock and he is our hope. And so in that context, it's not an easy message, but it's also a message of hope as we go through our current situation. We're here, Bishop James has already said the word navigate, and that was my word. We're here today so we can work out how we navigate through this together, and particularly from a financial perspective. We can have a quick look at how things were looking before the pandemic hit. We're then going to look at briefly at what's happened since the pandemic hit, and then particularly importantly, what do we need to do now going forward. So before coronavirus hit, if you cast your mind back to a year ago, we were travelling around the diocese for the Bishop's Road shows. We had a particular financial theme. That seems a long time ago now, doesn't it? We were coming towards the end of the 6-year Godfall vision period, which was had a 6-year budget plan that, through the grace of God, was pretty much working. It was a balanced budget over that 6-year period, and it looked to find a sustainable way through into the future. We could fund good, effective, strong ministry around the county. The parish contributions are the significant element of our income. You've undoubtedly heard me say this a number of times. And 100% of your offer is used to fund your local ministry. And in that context, our message was, this is really important to us. We know it's hard, but it's really important to the funding model that enabled us to be church through Cumbria. If we cast our minds even further back, the parish churches were asked some time ago to fund the burden of clergy pay and then pensions, and that was a massive change in the day, and huge credit that parishes, churches, congregations, individuals rose to that challenge. That was a massive thing, and it's become the norm, if you like. But over the last 10 years, the strains have started to show. We've been running a parish offer model for about 12 years now, and over that time there has been, as we've said before, just a general slow reduction in the money that's coming in. For many years it was just a gentle steady decline, but that has been accelerating over the last couple of years, and that was starting to make us give us concerns that we needed to address. Over that 10-year period, in fact, the real value of the parish offer received was 40% less, and that equates to the funding of something like 50 clergy. So this is a big thing. This is significant to us and what we can do. It's not a criticism, it's not a value statement, but it's a statement of fact, and it's really helpful that we're honest and open that that's what's happened, and that doesn't belittle in any way the huge sacrificial giving that goes into the parish offer. We still get £4.5 million. And that's people's hard-earned money that is given, and we never ever want to give the message that we don't appreciate that. We do, but it has been going down, and so we need to do something about that. And it's a shared challenge for us all around the county, around the diocese. Over that time, there was a planned reduction in clergy. No one revels in a reduction in stipendiary clergy, but it was planned, and the model was to land in a place that was then sustainable, and that sustainable model relied on an inflationary increase in the parish offer model. So this time last year we spent a lot of time talking about this, encouraging each other to aspire to this, and as we saw the parish offers come in for 2020, we did see enormous encouragement. We saw some churches really inspired by that message, who were able to increase their parish offer significantly. We saw and heard of parishes that had decided that they were going to not increase it, but then they did. Some that were going to reluctantly reduce it, and they changed their mind. So some real, it's a fantastic response. But we also know that some struggled, and much though they wanted to increase their offer, they just couldn't. They just didn't have the money. And if you haven't got the money, you can't pay it. So it's been a mixed message, and the 2020 parish offer came in at about £88,000 less than the previous year. So that's nearly 2%, and that's before inflation. So again, it was quite a drop, and that's the context that we were looking at life back in January. January seems a long time ago, doesn't it? But that's what we were facing. And as we looked to build a budget to resort to the next phase, the next refreshed vision for the diocese, that was the context in which we were looking at it, a continued reduction in the parish offer. We were doing lots of things to try and address it and mitigate it, but that was the backdrop. And then this horrible virus has hit, and it's rocked us to the core in so many ways. In terms of the finances, what's happened since then? Well, yes, parish offers have, to a really good extent, maintained, and for that, a huge thank you. Much of the money is still coming in. So far, for April, May, June, we're about 10% down each month compared to last year. So some of you are struggling already. Some of you are feeling the pain now. Some of you can see the pain coming, but you're faithfully giving still. You're not sure how long that can continue. And we feel that, we know that. And we're really grateful that you tell us as well, so we know. What have we as a diocese been doing? We've obviously been working incredibly hard to try to mitigate that reduction of income that we think is happening and will continue to happen. Well over half the diocesan staff, that's not clergy, but everyone else, been on furlough for a number of months. We have salary sacrifice schemes in place for staff and clergy who are giving up part of their pay. We haven't been recruiting. We've made some very significant savings, most of which are one-offs that we can't repeat. So we've done a pause in the quinquennial work on the clergy housing, for example. You can just about get away with that for a year, but you can't keep doing it. And sorry for those clergy who are affected by that. We're looking to work with the church commissioners to see what funding we can get from them. They are looking to address, give support to diocese, because they know that we're all in this together. But one of the most important things is that we're not doing anything hasty. It's very easy, and a number of dioceses have already announced big cuts in clergy. What we don't want to do is make hasty decisions that we then regret. That said, that's a costly thing to do. So we are effectively eating reserves as slowly as possible. But it's finding that balance between not panicking but being prepared to act quickly when you know what you want to do. So that's where we're at now. It's challenging. It's challenging for you, and it's challenging for us. We want to look forward. We have to start planning for the future. We have a number of scenarios worked out as to what the rest of this year and indeed the next couple of years might look like. We're calling them the scenarios: best case, worst case, and middle case, based on various what ifs. And they range for next year between a loss of £750,000 and £2 million. So these are significant numbers. So taking that in, the coronavirus impact and the ongoing decline in parish offer, we do have a significant issue that we need to address, and we want to address that together because this is our ministry. These are our churches that we're trying to resource as best we can. Bishop James's financial task group is live and kicking and working exceptionally hard, and it's addressing these issues. It's looking at what if the best case happens, what might we need to do? What if the worst case happens, what might we need to do? How would we respond if we landed somewhere in the middle? Those are the issues that the task force are grappling with, and I won't pretend they're easy because they're not. It's a really difficult. They're preparing to act when they need to act, and I think that's a really wise way in which we're doing this. The coronavirus has probably highlighted and accentuated the agility of all diocesan budgets, including our own. We traditionally have been a very stable and robust diocese. We too have risk, and we're very, very beholden to the parish offer system. So we are looking at all elements of the budget, and that does include the parish offer model and how we move that into the future. In terms of what we can do now, now is the time that we need to start thinking about 2021 parish offer. And we've been saying all along, gosh, that's so difficult. And gosh, it's still difficult. And we absolutely know that. What we need to do, though, is start to make some plans for different scenarios for next year. We can't be too fearful, too negative, because if we do, we might make too painful cuts, difficult decisions that perhaps we didn't need to. If we're too optimistic, we might then come to regret it as that optimism isn't borne out. So we need to try and find that honest, best middle ground that we can. How are we going to do that? We need thoughtful planning, and Sophie's going to take us through that a little bit in a minute. We need clear and honest communications between you as parishes and us as a diocese, between us as a diocese and the national church, but also within your congregations. What is the true cost of being church in your community, and how are we going to fund that? We need to look really hard, again, at stewardship and online giving and other ways that we can reach out into our communities for that funding. We need to look at new ways that we are going to invest in ministry and do ministry and reach out into our communities. We need to look at how we can build on the wonderful things that have happened during coronavirus. There have been so many fantastic stories of people and church doing amazing things. How do we build on that? How do we meet the spiritual thirst that has been evident in these last 3 months as people look to prayer, as people join our online worship, who would never come across the threshold of our churches? How do we respond to that? These are all really burning and important questions. We need to work together now to find our way forward, to navigate our way through this, and to come out with strength and with hope and with love to be a sustainable and strong church. There's going to be tough decisions. We can't shy away from that. But with honesty and hope in our hearts, I do think we can find a really strong way through this. We're going to pause for a minute for some questions, and then Sophie's going to talk about a little bit about the practicalities of how we want to start planning for next year, because we know it's not easy. But I just want to remind you of that image of God being our rock as we go through this, as we sit there and look at numbers, with the risk of despair and concern and not knowing the way forward. Let's look to God as our rock, as our strength, and just pray that He would show us His paths to do this. So I think we're over to question and answers, which I think David's going to host. He's in the know. I'm going to hand back to him because I don't know what I'm doing now. Dave, over to you.
Thanks, Rick. Just to pick up on a couple of recurring themes in questions we've had through so far, and maybe Bishop James, if you could answer this. 2 people have asked about buildings and strategy for buildings as we move forward. So we have one attendee asking, surely now is the time to plan strategically to reduce the number of buildings in which weekly services are held. The model currently being followed is, in this person's opinion, not sustainable for the next generation.
Thank you very much indeed. That's a really good point. As it happens, the strategic task group that Rick mentioned a moment ago was discussing this very item just yesterday at its meeting. It's clearly a key factor, not because buildings cost diocesan funds very much, but they cost local churches and local parishes a huge amount, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, every year. And we have got a building strategy that we've had for some time that involves a menu of options for buildings. We haven't perhaps implemented that as forcefully or as directly as we might have over the last few years. One of the things we decided yesterday at the task group was that we need to start implementing it more directly in the months to come. But one of the things we're quite clear about is that these decisions need to be made locally rather than centrally. One of the things I've discovered from my experience both here and in other dioceses has been that if you try to start making decisions about local churches centrally, you enter into a kind of struggle that takes everybody's time, effort and attention. The decisions need to be made locally, and we will be doing everything we can to encourage and help people to do exactly that. And mission communities will be more than warmly encouraged. They'll be required to produce building strategies for all the buildings in their area in the not very distant future. So thank you for the question. Absolutely spot on.
Thanks, Bishop James. A question for Rick. 3 people have drawn on this, Rick, in terms of the level of reserves that the diocese currently holds. I know that in your presentation you spoke about that. You touched on reserves. So
yeah, absolutely. So in the as yet unpublished, because it hasn't been audited yet, figures for last year, our unrestricted funds, our unrestricted reserves in the general fund are around about £2 million. We then have some designated funds, about 1.8 million of designated funds, which a large proportion of that is in the growth fund, which is designated at the moment for church growth projects, which parishes can apply for funds. So our unrestricted general fund is about £2 million. It won't take a genius to work out that based on the potential losses that we're talking about, we could get through those quite quickly within the next year. So we, like many of you, have got very thin unrestricted reserves. We have a big balance sheet, but most of that is endowment, for which the funds are restricted largely to for property and stipendiary expenditure. And our model over the last few years, every time we have a surplus property, a vicarage, for example, that is sold, we don't use that to prop up a deficit. We invest that into its restricted money, and it is there to earn interest, to earn dividends, to fund future ministry. And that's been very much our model, to try and take pressure off the Parish Offer model. But in terms of unrestricted, yeah, about 2 million in the general fund. It was more.
Thanks, Rick. Still on the financial theme again, probably for you, this one, Rick. A question from Bob Baird. Thank you, Bob, who says, hasn't he seen potential loss figures of between £3 and £6 million?
Okay, what Bob's referring to there is, as I talked about earlier, was the scenario planning that we're doing. So our scenario planning actually covers 2020, 21 and 22. And if you add up for those 3 years, the current range, because it has changed a few times as we learn a little bit more, and brace yourselves for these, the current spread is somewhere between £1.7 million and £7.1 million. Now, worst case is pretty bad, and we obviously don't want to be anywhere near that. But those will be the figures that are probably an earlier version that Bob has seen. And that's what the task force are looking at as their points of reference.
Thanks, Rick. A comment and a reflection from John Tyndale. Maybe Bishop James, you could just pick up on, and then I think we'll probably have to move on to the next presentations. But John talks about he feels there's presently a disconnect occurring between the diocese and the church in the parishes. Do you feel that's the case? And if so, what do you feel we need to do to reconnect?
Gosh, I'm grateful for the comment. I think I'd want to know exactly what John means by the disconnect. If it's to do with lack of information or communication, then I'm really sorry about that, because we're trying to communicate as much as we can, not only about finance, but about everything else. And that's part of the point of this afternoon. But if there is that, then I'd be very grateful for some more information about exactly what he has in mind, and we'll do our best to put that right. It's not been my experience, I have to say, but then that doesn't mean to say it's not happening. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Bishop James. One final quick question for Rick. This has come from Rob Hampshire, who asks, can we explain further about the best and worst and mid-range forecasts that we alluded to?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a really good question. So what we've tried to do, as charities and businesses will be doing all around the world at the moment, is to try and work out the range where they think the finance is going to be over the next year and a half. And predominantly what we've done is we looked at what could happen to our income sources. So that only includes the mitigation that I've mentioned for this year. So the savings that we're looking to make this year, and then if we carried on without changing anything else year and the year after, what are the different losses we might face? And they look at each element of income, and in each case they have a spread. So we have a range of potential loss in Parish Offer, for example, that I think goes from 10% up to 40%. So what if the best case was if we lost 10% of Parish Offer next year, for example, and then there's a better picture than that for the year after, and the economy bounces back. And likewise, we've gone through all the different areas of income that we have. So what do we think our investment will do in the next few years? What do we think we might be able to invest by being a little bit more aggressive, if that's the right word, with selling property, investing money? So in each income area, we think what's the best we hope for, what's the worst we fear, and what's in the middle. Some of them are unaffected. We don't think the hydro scheme income is going to be affected by the virus, but most other things could be, and particularly with the global economy, we do get a lot of money in investment income through CCLA, and so again with that we have a spread. What's the worst, what's the best, and that's how we put those together.
Thanks very much, Rick. So with hydro not affected, we're praying for a lot of rain, presumably. Right, okay. Just moving on. You're going to hear now from, firstly from Sophie, and then from Anna Newlove. Please do keep your questions coming in. There'll be a further question session at the end of these two presentations. Please do use the Q&A facility rather than the chat facility. It just means that we can keep all the questions in one place, and then we don't miss any, hopefully. Sophie, over to you.
Great, thanks very much, Dave. Rick's job was to kind of explain the diocesan bigger picture, the strategic work that's going on, and financially how we're trying to meet challenges in order to secure the mission and the ministry of church in 2021 and beyond. My job is to really talk to you about what we need you to do. So my job is the much more kind of practical nitty-gritty. And as Rick has already intimated, when we're looking at the bigger picture, looking at the overall finances and where we're going, Parish Offer is a really crucial part of that jigsaw, because actually Parish Offer is still our largest income source, and 100% of Parish Offer goes to paying for local ministry on the ground in our communities. So we can't think about the future and think about different scenarios and how we're going to provide mission and ministry going forward without tackling Parish Offer. And for this reason, despite all of the financial uncertainties that we know you are facing at parish level, which Bishop James outlined earlier, we do now need parishes to start considering their 2021 parish offers. To put it simply, as a diocese, we want to be in a place where come September, we have some really important meetings happening, some meetings of the Bishop's Council and the Diocesan Board of Finance. And in those meetings in mid-September, they are going to be making important budget decisions and deciding which scenario we're in. Is it the best case, middle case, or worst case? And obviously having an indication of what our 2021 parish offer is going to be, our largest source of income, is a really important part of making that decision. So if me and Rick are honest, we had hoped that we'd be able to wait a little bit longer before starting this conversation with you. We'd hoped that by the time we started talking about 2021 parish offers, that maybe churches would have returned to a more normal pattern of worship, maybe our kind of lives would have returned to a bit more of a normal pattern, and therefore you as churches would have much more certainty in terms of being able to plan what your finances might might look like for the rest of 2020, and what your income might look like in 2021. But sadly, that isn't the case. For most of us, we are still facing lots of uncertainty. The first thing I want to do is just highlight an important date, and that important date is Tuesday, the 1st of September. And that's the date that we would really, really like you to have made your parish offers to your parish offer coordinators by, so that we can compile that information for mid-September. But because we know that, as Rick said, uncertainty is the buzzword at the moment, we really wanted to think about how can we try and support parishes in this process of making 2021 parish offers when we know that there's so much uncertainty about the future. And so because of that, we have actually produced a resource for treasurers and for PCCs to use when putting together their 2021 parish offers. Obviously, it's completely voluntary, so if you've got your own ways of budgeting and thinking this through, that's great. But if as a PCC, you are feeling slightly overwhelmed and slightly unsure where to start when it comes to thinking about a 2020 parish offer, we really hope that this resource might support you in your thinking process. So basically the idea is that it will be a simple pro forma template. It will be looking at your incomes from your last accounts, whether they are draft or not, and then thinking about what might happen in the next, for the remainder of 2020, and what might happen in 2021, and how that will affect your parish income. Alongside that spreadsheet, we have a number of questions and assumptions that we suggest you might want to think and talk through as a PCC. And we hope that by working your way through these assumptions, so they cover things like when you reopen worship, how many of your congregation do you think are likely to return? It will help you think through things like room hire income, fundraisers, when might they restart, kind of looking at all the different aspects of parish income and helping you to work out what would be a sensible assumption to make on these income streams. We've made it flexible, so we realise that the situation in one part of the county might be quite different to another part of the county, so it's not kind of blanket rules that we are suggesting that you apply, but actually some principles that we then say do adapt to your local context. So yeah, we're going to be sending this resource out, and our hope is that it will just give you a place to start when it comes to thinking and discussing what your 2021 parish offer might look like. So we're actually in the process of testing that resource on a few treasurers at the moment. And hopefully we will be able to just tweak it and make it even better to use. And then the hope is that we'll be sending that out via email to treasurers as soon as possible. So I'm just going to now talk you through the timeline. Dave, I think I've got a little PowerPoint for this, just to make it super clear. So the first thing to say is that the first part of the process is obviously today, and our Parish Offer webinar. So thank you ever so much for everyone who's joined us today. This will be available on YouTube, so if there's others that weren't able to make it who you think would be interested, please feel free to share. And then our hope is that next week, each PCC treasurer and incumbent will receive a letter from Bishop James, and that letter will outline what the parish offer process is going to be for this year, what the timeline is going to be, and obviously will be particularly valuable for people who haven't been here today, but also we'll just have everything in writing for you guys as well. So that's going to go out next week, and then the week after, we hope that the resource that we were just describing to you to help you think through your parish offers, we will email that out week commencing the 13th of July, and that will be sent to all PCC treasurers. It will also be on our website. If you or any parishes you know don't have access to email or don't have access to download things from our website, please get in touch with us and we'll make sure you get sent a copy. We're then leaving you about 6 weeks to have those conversations and discussions at your PCC level in terms of working through the resource, also working through the important information that will be in Bishop James's letter. And we hope that using those two things, you'll be able to prayerfully come to what you feel is an appropriate parish offer for 2021. And we hope that you will submit that parish offer to your coordinators by Tuesday, the 1st of September. Please be assured that we will take those parish offers in the spirit in which they're made, i.e. that these are your honest best guesses, but made in a context of a lot of uncertainty. And we do realise that, and we do realise that it might be the case that we have to adapt our projections and change our assumptions as we go further into 2020 or even into 2021. So we realise that they're your best guesses, and we will take them in that spirit. The other thing I wanted to say is that we also recognise that there are PCCs who are already on a slightly different track when it comes to parish offer. So all of the principles that I've just spoken about will apply to every parish, and every parish will have access to the resource that I've just mentioned. But if, for example, in the Archdeaconry of West Cumberland, because of all the mission community parish offer work that went on earlier this year, you'll be making your parish offer via your mission community rather than your deanery coordinator. And similarly, East of Eden mission community have a slightly different setup in place, but I know that they're communicating with their parish churches on that as well. So that's completely fine, but the principles apply across the board. So we know it's not easy. We know there's a huge amount of uncertainty, but hopefully we have been able to give those parishes that feel they need it a kind of somewhere to start. And all we can say is please try your best. We know that discussing things as a PCC even is really challenging at the moment. Some of you might be able to use Zoom, others of you might need to email stuff around or make telephone calls, but we know that there's a whole lot of this process that is really quite tricky, and we just say please do your best. And then the final thing that obviously we want to say is thank you. Thank you to treasurers for working so hard in the context of so much uncertainty and anxiety. Thank you to all PCC members and incumbents who've actually been working so hard to support the work of local church at this time, probably I would say the most challenging time in kind of church life that there's been for generations. But we do really appreciate all that you're doing to support your local church at this time. And obviously, if there is any way that we can support you, please get in touch with us. Hopefully that's covered everything that I was supposed to. And I think I'm going to be handing over to Anna now.
Yes, so thank you, Sophie. So I'll just briefly introduce myself. So I'm Anna Newlove. I'm going to be taking on the stewardship enabler role in a couple of weeks' time when Sophie goes away on maternity leave. So I'm just going to briefly chat to you about what work we are doing to try and support you and your income at this time. In view of everything that's been said and all the challenges faced by traditional income streams at the minute, we really want to encourage you to be proactive in finding new ways to encourage giving, and we want to support you in that work however we can. So our kind of key point is to encourage you to sign up for online giving options. So the easiest way to do that is through the platform the Diocese has set up, and we've had 40 churches sign up already, and they've all had really encouraging responses to this. So we would encourage more to keep signing up. So it's really easy. If you're interested, all you need to do is email Sophie and myself at stewardship@carlisledioceses.org.uk, which I think is going to be on a slide later as well, so don't worry about writing that down. We will then set up pages for you and send the links out to you. So there'll be one page for one-off gifts and one page for regular giving that you can then share however you want. On those pages, givers will have the option to cover transaction fees, to increase regular gifts in line with inflation, and to give a gift aid declaration as well. So there's lots of kind of features of it that will really help. What will happen is donations will come into the diocese, we'll claim gift aid on your behalf, and then we'll send the donations and gift aid out to you on a monthly basis. So it's really easy for you. Essentially, you can share the links and then hopefully the donations will come in from there. These links are helpful for those churches who aren't meeting physically yet. But in light of the government's guidance at the start of the week, where they're recommending avoiding cash donations where possible, these could be really important moving forward, even if you're meeting physically in a church building, to continue giving in the coming months. For churches that are starting to go back to worshipping together physically, if you feel it's appropriate, you may want to encourage your givers to catch up, so to speak, on regular gifts such as envelope giving and weekly plate giving. We'll be sending out guidance on how you might want to do this in the next couple of weeks. And it's really important to say that if people do decide to do this, GADs can be claimed on all of the individual donations, even if they sum up to above £30. So you can still claim via the GAD scheme. And finally, the last thing I want to mention is there are several grants available to churches at the minute that might be really useful to you. So the government has a retail, hospitality and leisure grant, which actually most church halls are eligible for. And that's a really simple application process, and you apply via your local council. There's also the Coronavirus Community Support Fund for churches, in particular supporting vulnerable communities through the pandemic. So that may apply for some of you. And finally, ecclesiastical insurers have created a fundraising hub on their website, and they've got a whole list of all grant funds open at the minute. So you can go there, and there's a huge long list of other places that may be helpful to you. And if you want to apply for any of them, if you email stewardship again, me and Sophie can send you the links out to those grants I've just mentioned for you to then apply. And I think I'm handing back to Dave now for the next question and answer session.
Thanks, Hannah. Just to point out that it's been brought to our attention that this webinar, which we'd had hoped to have 180 people here, has a limit of 100 people, which we were unaware of. We will be looking to rectify that as soon as possible. Obviously, this is going to be uploaded onto the Diocesan YouTube channel, so it will be there as a resource for people to watch. But the whole point of these sessions is for questions to be thrown to panelists. So we will be looking to rectify this as soon as we possibly can. And I know they're not with us, but our apologies are with those people who've not been able to log on to the webinar today. Just turning to some questions around some of the presentations we've just heard. Just a pointer from Matt Einson, thanks Matt, and maybe Sophie you can pick up on this. In the timeline that you referred to, you made reference to parish offers being submitted by parish offer coordinators by September the 1st, but Matt's saying that the last PCC meeting before September the 1st is next Wednesday. So they won't be able to return something to us by the 1st of September. Is there any wriggle room? Is there any wriggle room in that date, or do we need that date to be adhered to?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's one of the extra challenges we're facing. So we're facing the challenges of being able to physically meet together, the challenges of the uncertainty, and then there is the challenges of the the short timeline. Usually we try and get information out in April, and we are aware that this is much, much later than April. The reason we didn't get information out sooner was because we didn't want to burden parishes with thinking about Parish Offer at a time when we thought there was no way that they could begin to imagine what a 2021 Parish Offer would look like. It then, as work progressed with the various kind of strategic groups, it became apparent that we did actually really need an indication of 2021 parish offers by the beginning of September. I do realise that that is tight. We really rushed to get this webinar together today because we knew that a lot of parishes did meet in July and didn't meet in August. Now, I'm not sure how many parishes are keeping their normal kind of structure for for PCC meetings at the moment anyway, but we certainly knew that in a normal year parishes would often meet in July and not meet in August. So we rushed to try and get this together for the beginning of July so that we could get information out as soon as possible. We realised that it will create problems for some parishes where this doesn't fit their schedule of meetings. All I can say is we're asking you to do your best in every aspect. We do need an indication of 2021 parish offers by the beginning of September, because if we didn't get any information, we just wouldn't be able to make the decisions we need to make. Perhaps if PCC conversations are really not possible, perhaps the Treasurer could work through the resource that Rick's produced and kind of maybe just passed it by a couple of PCC members to see if it feels right, and then we would understand that that might be updated at a later point. But if it is possible for PCCs to get something to us for the beginning of September, we would be hugely grateful. I don't know if Rick has anything to add.
Yeah, if I just add to that, I think Sophie's explained it really well. I think we're really conscious that this doesn't fit very well, but so much of this coronavirus is just not good. We just ask for as much flexibility as you're able to do. If it's not a formal PCC meeting, as treasurers particularly, the burden falls on you to do your best in difficult circumstances. If you can run it past other people for a sense check, that's great. We'd rather have a rough and ready indication based on working through that resource. Send it to us, and then if you need to change it later, that's fine. But it will be your first best guess. It's going to be really helpful to us. If it doesn't go through a PCC structure, we get that. That's fine. These are difficult, challenging times, so we need to be a bit flexible. And we really appreciate what you're going to end up having to do to get this to us. We know it's a big ask, and we're sorry, but we're in this together. So that's my views on it.
Thanks, Rick. And just to pick up on that, there's a really helpful observation from David Birchall. Thanks, David, who says PCCs can hold a Zoom meeting or an extraordinary meeting to finalise offers rather than wait. Flexibility, and I think that's the word that you've just used, Rick, is key to meetings now. We live in different times. We have to adapt. I say that knowing that we're all sick and fed up of Zoom meetings, but if you can manage another one, please do. Just a couple of other observations and reflections. One from Charles Hope. Thanks, Charles. Sophie, in your timeline, you talked about emailing resources to treasurers, but he also asks if they can be emailed to incumbents also to help support treasurers.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that feedback. We'll make sure we do that. Thank you.
And likewise, a quick observation from Brian Davis. For those churches in interregnum, will the bishop's letter that you alluded to in the timeline, will that go to church wardens? That's going to treasurers anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, so that letter will go to all treasurers and incumbents. So hopefully that should catch someone from every parish. If it doesn't arrive by the end of next week, then do get in touch with us. But yeah, treasurers and incumbents should be receiving that letter.
Okay, that's great. I'm just looking, bearing in mind the time. I think that we probably need to move on now. All I would say is that if you have any further questions, queries, observations, please do email the stewardship@carlislediocese.org.uk email address there that you see before you. Anything that you may wish to add to the conversation we've had today, we will respond to. So that's the email to respond to. That's stewardship@carlislediocese.org.uk. And finally, just before I hand over to Bishop James, all I will say is at the end of Bishop James's reflections, that's the opportunity there for everybody then to leave the meeting. So please just click on the leave meeting button after Bishop James has finished. Thank you so much for all your attendance.
Dave, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to say a prayer first and offer one or two thanks, and then we'll offer one or two very brief reflections on what we've heard, and that will be it, as Dave has indicated. So first of all, the prayer, which reminds us that all of this is going on against a backdrop of refreshing our vision for the next few years, where we've been focusing on God for all for the last several years. And we've been taking a careful look at that, doing a lot of listening, and we're making quite sure that we're not being deflected from that by coronavirus. And that is providing the context in which a lot of the strategic planning that's currently taking place is happening. The question that we've been thinking about, of course, is how we resource everything that we feel we're being called to be and to do. So here's, first of all, a prayer. Help us, O keeper of faith, to keep the faith entrusted to us. Faith in a world worth saving. Faith in a dream worth sharing. Faith in a heritage worth keeping, even as we reinvigorate it to have meaning for us now. Help us to keep faith in you, and help us not to lose faith in ourselves, because we know that our faith is the substance of our hope, and hope the assurance of love. Praise to you, O faithful one, now and forever. Amen. And my thanks, first of all, to the panel. Very grateful to all those who've been speaking particularly. Thank you to Dave for chairing. This has been an unbelievably busy time for Dave with all the coronavirus and all the communications from the Central Church that we've been trying to feed on out, and everything we've been trying to say to parishes. So grateful to you, Dave. Thank you very, very much, and for this. And to Rick and Sophie and Anna for their very clear and very compassionate presentations. I saw that word in one of the comments that was made, and I would want to reiterate that. Thank you very, very much. And thank you to all of you, those of you who I can't see, but who've been taking part in this webinar, for everything that you are doing and for your astonishing commitment. We really appreciate, as I hope has been evident in this time, the pressure that you are under and the problems that you're facing. And we want to help, and that was a word that's been used often this afternoon, in absolutely every way we can. And we're so grateful for all your hard work and vision, without which we wouldn't exist as a diocese, and we wouldn't be able to continue with the vision that we have. There's been quite a lot of emphasis on the way in which we rely on Parish Offer. There are some dioceses that have huge historic reserves. We're not one of them, I regret to say. There was a question about reserves, and Rick addressed that. And Parish Offer remains, as we were reminded, our largest income source, 100% of it goes into paying for local ministry, and that local ministry is currently further subsidized by all our income from investments and from other sources like the hydro scheme and so on. And so we are absolutely reliant on our parish offer for all our stipendiary clergy, their stipends, their housing and their pensions. So this is really a very important topic. And we are planning strategically for a sustainable future. We've been doing that actually for several years, but we didn't know that this particular crisis was going to hit us in the way it has. This has brought to the fore a number of the issues that we've been trying to tackle. As was indicated earlier on, we're doing our best not to make hasty decisions, but equally not to hang around and waste a lot of money unnecessarily in the process. The task group, which consists of people from Bishop's Council, people from our Board of Finance and others, is working very, very hard on producing various possible ways forward. There have been a lot of positive stories, and again, this was mentioned in some of the presentations, and spin-offs from this lockdown. Really some wonderful things going on around the county. I've been absolutely amazed and very proud, I have to say, of some of the efforts that have been made, particularly working in and with local communities. But the big challenge is especially on the parish offer front, and we'll be so grateful if you're able to respond to the request Sophie made for engaging with the submission of parish offers for next year. We know that it's a push and it's not easy to communicate at the moment, but we'll just be tremendously grateful. We are operating in a context of huge uncertainty, many, many unknowns. But as several people have already commented in the chat and questions and answers, God is our rock. We do trust in him completely for our future and for the mission to which all of us are called. And it's with that thought that we want to leave you this afternoon. Thank you very much for taking part.